If welcome to the Twin Bill podcast, I'm your host Scott Bolohan, and today I'm joined by Scott Reich, author of One Day in September: Baseball, Brotherhood, and the Birth of the All-Star Game. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great. Great to be with you.
That's great. You are in Long Island, on Long Island. Sorry,
I was going to
the
say, I
Midwest.
mean,
I know
you,
the
you can't get me
Midwesterner in
in Long
me.
Island.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, that's the one thing. I've been out here for 17 years, and the on Long Island thing, and standing online too, is the other thing that gets me.
Totally.
That's
That's the
never
old
going to
Jerry
be.
Seinfeld bit of
It
in
is.
versus on, and comes up quite a bit. You can always know, you always learn pretty quickly when somebody is either from the island or not, because the in or the on is the dead giveaway right away.
Yep. And it just does not come natural to me, and it probably never will. The book is really interesting. This is a story I had no knowledge of whatsoever. I knew a lot of the key players, but it's amazing that there are still stories like that out there in baseball for us to find, involving, half of the, early greatest players that ever played. It's absolutely wild. I always like to start off by asking, where does this idea originally start off for you? How does this originally come to fruition for you here?
Scott, being honest, this happened completely by accident. I was researching a totally unrelated book and came across a story about baseball being played on the White House lawn during the Civil War. And for whatever reason, I went down an online rabbit hole, and it led me to reading about different exhibition games that had been played. And sure enough, I found my way to this game that was played in September 1917 at Fenway Park in memory of this incredible figure who's totally forgotten today, Tim Murnane, who had died, and baseball wanted to raise money for him. So they played this all-star game with the World Series defending champion Red Sox hosting, with Babe Ruth on the mound in his pre-Yankee days, against this galaxy of all-stars, as you were describing, with Ty Cobb and Shoeless Joe Jackson, Walter Johnson, managed by Connie Mack. I mean, it's a who's who of that era. And when I came across the story, I was like, I've heard of most of these players, same reaction you had. I've never heard of Tim Murnane. I've never heard of this game. And I never appreciated where the All-Star game really originated. And there's a blueprint for it, and it's this game. So when that presented itself, I was like, all right, I'm going to stop working on the other project that I'm pursuing, because this is awesome. And I'm a sports nut, but I was not intending to write even a sports book, let alone something about baseball and something that happened over 100 years ago. But I found the story so compelling, so human, and so relevant today, despite how much time has passed, that I wanted to be the one to give it fresh legs and share the story with a broader audience.
So, as you kind of mentioned, you have done a lot with presidential history, generally history in America. And can you kind of situate baseball and the landscape of the role that baseball has at this time? Especially, this is during the war. This is wartime at this point.
Yeah, so the game that we'll talk about further, that I explore in the book, is 1917. America has entered World War I at this point. But to rewind a little bit, and this is one of the fun pieces of having had the chance to research this topic, is that I normally swim in the presidential history lane, as you're describing. My prior books on President Kennedy. I've been an adjunct lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania on the presidency for 10 years, and I love all of that. But what I think one learns when appreciating history is that so much is interwoven. You and I might talk about a specific baseball game today, and to us that may feel like, okay, this is a particular event and we could focus on baseball, but we have to situate it in the times in which the game actually occurred. And for the people who were there, the participants, the spectators, the people who were aware of it, they were living their normal, ordinary lives with the intersection of all the normal things that we care about today, right? Like, how am I going to make a living? What kind of stuff am I doing for fun? How am I taking care of my family? What job do I have? Like all the questions that sort of lead to our identities and govern the things that we do are inseparable, right? Even if I were to go to a baseball game this evening, that doesn't mean that, like, okay, at that time in Scott Reich's life, he was just totally focused on baseball, right? Like, I could be doing stuff all day long and it's an escape for a few hours, and I come back to whatever I was doing before. So I share that context because historically, baseball becomes our pastime, because for the very reason that it sort of weaves in and out all the different, sort of aspects of American life. So you have the commerce side of it, and athletics is, an emerging piece of it. But you also have immigration, you have employment law, you have like all these things that you're like, how does that come into being, right? But like, we didn't have free agency at the beginning, and what did player contracts look like, and what did it cost to go to the game, and what sort of traditions arose, and how was this a square, a public square, if you will, where people could escape the limitations of their birth environment, so to speak, to enjoy a different life. And baseball offered all of these things. And this year, of course, we're commemorating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence as a nation. But it's also the 150th anniversary of the birth of the National League, and therefore Major League Baseball. The American League comes around in 1901. So there's this constant motion of baseball personifying what's going on in America. So we have discrimination in baseball. We have rivalries between cities and teams and people across religious lines and people across political lines. And, we don't think about that today because we think, oh, what were the Red Sox like in 1917? It's like, you don't think about that. But this was a team where some of the guys didn't even talk to each other on the same team, in a city that had massive rivalry between Protestants and Catholics. And you had these waves of immigrants coming from Europe who were looking to, make a living, to seek their freedom. And, people that may not even speak the language here. And baseball became this common thread for people. It was a place that people could not only demonstrate their athletic prowess, but also to develop into people of good character as good citizens and people who sought virtue and honor. And those are words that seem to have, I don't want to say evaporated, but become less visible in our
It's
public
not on the
discourse. And
forefront.
so,
Yeah,
yeah, so there's something romantic about this era also, because we're talking about like this, the golden adolescence of baseball is a time when communication is becoming more ubiquitous. We're able to actually get results from a newspaper in Philadelphia about something that happened in St. Louis the night before, right? Like that didn't happen in the middle of the Civil War. Of course, there wasn't professional baseball, but what I'm saying is that the speed with which information could travel changed things. And because newspapers were there, people were able to start writing stories and these epic tales of year over year tradition and rivalry and opportunities to develop pride in a hometown team. This is, and of course, you have all sorts of things entering the English vernacular that come from baseball of, three strikes and you're out. Hey, you're batting 1,000, right? You're out of left field. These are all idioms that come from baseball that take on other meanings. So this is the backdrop in which this remarkable game gets played.
And I segue possibility here. I assume one of those people that was helping to sort of shape the game in the way that we discussed the game was Tim. Oh, I'm going to say it wrong. Tim Murnane. Tim Murnane.
Tim Murnane. Yeah. So you're absolutely right about it.
Again, a guy who I do not had never heard of.
No one's heard of this guy.
Don't even know how to say his name correctly.
Yeah. Look, he died in February of 1917. Your question is spot on. He was one of the major pillars of early baseball. He was an original player in the National League, won a championship. He became an umpire. He was a manager. He was a commissioner of minor leagues around the country and became this trusted advisor to people in the major leagues also. He was somebody who had integrity, who had strong character, who talked about the importance and meaning of the game just as much as he broke down the strategies and the analytics and all the different things that informed what the game was operationally. So where he really gets his claim to fame is that he becomes the most famous baseball writer in America. After his career concludes, he becomes the sports editor of the Boston Globe, where he works for 30 years and becomes the voice of baseball. In Boston in that era, it's easy for us to forget about this today, but there were two professional teams in Boston. Just as we have the Mets and Yankees in New York, you had the Boston Red Sox and the Boston Braves. And so this is one of the epicenters of the game. And Murnane is writing about both of these teams, knows the players, knows the owners, attends the games and knows the fans. So like everybody knows this guy. He's instantly recognizable. He has this shock of white hair. They call him the Silver King is his nickname. And his column gets syndicated oftentimes. And so people, not just in Boston, but around the country, know who he is. And so when he died, there was this outpouring of grief that really defined a lot of that season of baseball in 1917, of people saying, man, this was like the godfather of our sport. And it became quickly known that his family, he had 6 children, and he had gotten married a second time later in life, and he had no money when he died. So he had a young family, and they needed food on the table, and it was his dream that they would all be able to attend school and have the upward mobility that he sought in America. And so baseball came together and said, let's honor one of our own and do a memorial benefit game that will have the added context of uniting people in wartime. And so they played this game at Fenway Park, and they invited all the great players of the day in both leagues to participate. They had a home run derby before the game, a fastest race around the bases, most accurate throw, longest throw. So this whole competition. You had incredible entertainment. Will Rogers, the great entertainer, comes on horseback on the field at Fenway Park before the game with a rope in his hand, lassoing the players. You have John L. Sullivan, the heavyweight boxing champ, who's comes in with a big greeting and everybody's cheering for him. And he dies himself a few months later. So this might have even been his last public appearance. Fanny Bryce from the Ziegfeld Follies is selling programs. So it's a who's who, not only in baseball, but more broadly of what's going on in America. And it happens to be on the eve by a few months of a mayor election in Boston. So this becomes a political event also with the candidates there. I mean, this has a little bit of everything. And, it's sort of like a Boardwalk Empire meets Eight Men Out and Field of Dreams,
Yeah,
type
yeah,
feel. And
yeah.
the more I read about it, I mean, at first I wasn't even sure that it had actually happened, but I did a lot of research in archives, Boston Public Library, the National Archives, Cooperstown, and Library of Congress. And turns out that it did. I mean, this is the beauty of research these days. You can find so much online. And this became a window for me to not only look into the past, but actually to use the past to look into our times here and who are we as a society. And maybe this is something we could talk about a little bit about, like, where is baseball in 2026? We're on the eve, it seems, of a lockout season, and
Hmm.
there's all sorts of questions around what is this game? What do we stand for? And I'll let you continue us from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting First of all, I kept trying to contextualize, like, oh, so would this kind of be like if Peter Gammons, keep it in Boston, if he passes away? But then it's like, well, the money has changed so much now,
Everything's
where
changed.
and I'm guessing that Peter Gammons doesn't need the money. I can't speak for Peter Gammons, but the players make
Well,
too
this is,
much
look,
money now. It's like, and so it's like everything is now. I think you see a sense of camaraderie and just goodwill that maybe exists in today's world, but it's not something I really associate with baseball necessarily in the same
Well,
sort
look,
of way.
the game has gotten so big, and because it's been around for so long, there are so many figures that we might call Tim Murnane-esque in terms of their influence over generations and over eras. And sure, Peter Gammons certainly feels like a modern representation of that. But there are others, and obviously it's not limited to Boston. We have all different cities with these famous television anchors and newspaper reporters and people that are just the beat writers that are keeping us informed on the day to day of what's going on. I think that it's not that we're less philanthropic or generous in terms of our impulses as a people. I think that's one of the key ingredients actually of America, that we do have those things. What's changed is partly that the ways in which we might manifest those tendencies are totally different. These days, when there's a charitable cause, if somebody posts something on social media or Twitter or whatever it may be, and they're like, hey, this matters to me, or I'm running a 5K, can you support this cause? It's transactional. So people give their token donation, whatever that may be, typically, and they move on. They're not as connected to it. What we've lost, as connected as it feels with the digitization of America, is that sense of physical connectivity, the idea, the art, it seems, of gathering in person. Yes, we go to baseball games, we go to other sporting events, we go to concerts, but there's almost something, but it's not the same as what it once was. And these days it seems that people are more willing to, if I can avoid having a call, I'll send person an email, right? And I'll send a text instead of a call. I'm not going to show up at my neighbor's house and knock on the door, right? Like, nobody knocks on somebody's door unexpectedly anymore. We have cell phones. Like, hey, you shoot a text? Do you mind if I stop by? I'm going to call you. Can we make a plan, right? This was just how neighborhoods operated back then, because there was no other way. And so I think that, the commerce has, of course, changed also. What I didn't mention yet that I think makes this game even more remarkable is that the players who participated from these teams left their regularly scheduled games during a pennant race, September, to play on their own dime for no money, taking overnight trains to be there in Boston to participate, to participate. Think about that word, just to be part of it. And it was so selfless. And now part of the challenge is that the money is so much. And we also have owners that obviously have contracts with players that they want to see enforced, and they don't want these players doing things outside of their contractual responsibilities. I mean, can you imagine somebody gets hurt here and then they miss the playoffs, they miss the World Series? Turns out the Chicago White Sox go on to win the World Series this year. They have multiple players playing in this game. Anything could have happened. So to me, that's the most remarkable aspect of this. And it's the most revealing too, because it's the thing that I think many of us lament about where society has gone, in that we are unwilling, it seems, oftentimes as a society, and I'm speaking collectively generally here, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody, we are unwilling to subordinate our personal interests because everyone is in it for themselves. And maybe this is an argument about other things, but that doesn't mean that that's like an anti-capitalist thing. The idea is that there's room for entrepreneurship and individuality alongside community and public responsibility. And one of the things that I would love to see more of in professional sports is the stewardship element, the citizenship component of a tradition. We're recently in the news, obviously, is that the Lakers have been sold for a franchise record $12.5 billion. And I'm not commenting on that deal, right? The valuations are astronomical and frankly incomprehensible for most of us people who are not in that orbit. But my point about it is that a lot of teams, it seems, have become primarily financial assets, oftentimes at the expense of other obligations that I think ought to come with sports franchise ownership. To be clear, that is not to suggest whatsoever that owners should not try to maximize their returns. This is America. This is, as I think it was Calvin Coolidge said, the business of America is business. And, we create jobs, we create opportunity. And so I don't mean this in a partisan or political way, but I think that what we have to recognize as a society is that people are entitled, absolutely, to go out and make the most money possible if that's what they want to do. Go for it, provided that you're following the rules. Having said that, sports franchises are unique because they're oftentimes, in fact, I would say most of the time, inherited in terms of fanhood. I don't know about you, but I grew up on Long Island. That's where I live today. My father grew up on Long Island. I root for all the same teams that my dad rooted and roots for. Why? Because I grew up and that's who he was rooting for. And I wanted to be like my dad. My dad's my hero, right?
Yeah.
So I wind up rooting for all these crappy teams, and I tell him it's all his fault. I've got the Islanders, the Mets, the Jets. It's been a tough run. We at least had the Knicks, although it was a nice quarter century of torture before this. So my point in saying that is that there is a communal ownership aspect to sports that I want to make sure we don't forget as a society, because it's the rituals, the traditions, the shared memories. My name may not be on the deed of any of the teams that I mentioned, but I own a little piece of them, right? Because it's my life, it's my memory, it's the place that I go, it's the place that I'm bringing my kids now. And so we have to always ensure that remains part of it. And one of my biggest concerns is what I perceive to be the inaccessibility, the undemocratic nature of how people are able to get to the games. I mean, the ticket prices have soared so much. And yes, we could go round and round and say, but yes, Scott, isn't that your earlier point of people should be able to do whatever they want? And it's like, yeah, but at the same time, I think it's a healthy thing for our society that people who may not be rich are able to attend sporting events. We had the World Cup earlier this year that the average fan could not attend in America, right? They were selling tickets for $1,000, $1,500 a pop in the upper deck for one seat. Why? Because, chasing money. And again, I'm not criticizing it, but I'm just saying there's got to be a balance.
I won a lottery for the World Cup that gave me the privilege to buy a $220 ticket.
Yeah, there you go.
And that was a steal. That was an absolute steal. It's a really good point. I want to get back to the game. So having just said all of this, who organizes this game? Where does this inspiration come to do something like this? Who takes charge? I think that's also maybe part of the problem is that there are not people out there who are like, hey, I'm going to do this. We need to do this. This is a good thing.
It's a great question because it sort of gets to who might do those types of things again today. And the answer is It's not entirely clear because we don't have memorialized notes from the meetings, but from what all the evidence suggests is that it was a group of people in Boston, because that's where Murnane had lived and died and where he was best known and most beloved, who came together, and it included some pretty prominent citizens who were personal friends of his. These included a former owner of the Red Sox, John I. Taylor. It included the commissioners, or at that time, the presidents of the National and American Leagues, who were the first people to buy box seats to demonstrate their support. It was owners of some of the teams. It was politicians like the mayor of Boston, a member of Congress that represented Boston. But it was John I. Taylor, I think, who was the real impetus behind this. And Taylor put this committee together, and it came together somewhat quickly. The idea emerged over the summer of 1917. And then by early September, that was the first time they even advertised it. I think around September 2nd, they announced, and the Boston Globe covered stories and, essentially said you can get tickets and come to this game. And the game was played September 27th. So you're talking about 3.5 weeks of, some promotion here. But here's the thing, Scott, that I think is so cool about this. This was ordinary to these guys. This was a natural civic reflex. This was not a super extra special everything, right? Meaning in the best way, meaning that this is something that it just felt natural to do this. Why would we not do this? And so I think that's what we feel has been lost because of the partly commercial aspects and partly because our society has become more inward focused rather than externally and communally focused. I mean, whether that's controversial or not to say, that's what I think is going on.
Yeah, it's interesting still that it took a relative level of people in power to organize this. The Athletic had a story that came out within the last week about the park across from Yankee Stadium, that where Yankee Stadium used to be, and it's kind of like fallen into disrepair. And I'm like, I want to do something about that. I think it's important that we keep these spaces usable and for the community. But like, I can't. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And maybe
Let's
that's
call
just
it the Steinbrenners and talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's the thing is like it still takes that level of I don't know if it's purely a money thing or an influence thing. Like I could go pick up trash, and I thought, I give tours for the Yankees before my tour shift. I can go by the park. I could pick up some trash. Is that going to do anything? I don't know. I think it takes a greater good, and we just don't have that buying in-ness.
There's no question that it's helpful to have leaders of prominence and in positions of influence to lead or at least support and perhaps help lead some of these initiatives. But I would actually push back slightly on that. And what I mean by it is that may help drive things at scale. It certainly does, right? We're all aware of the roles that money and influence and power can play. But I think the basic premise of the Murnane Day and the real legacy of it is to remind us that small acts by people add up, and they may never be visible. No one may ever write an article about the trash that you picked up before you gave a tour at Yankee Stadium. And even if it did, some people would say, who cares that this guy did that? It's one person, he picked up 11 pieces of garbage, right? But that is going to make you feel good and the people who do it. And I think that matters because pride in one's community is what creates a sense of civic obligation and a desire to be a good citizen. And when one feels fulfilled and happy and feeling productive in society, it enhances that person's individual and perhaps collective sense of what it means to feel that sense of pride, which then informs and animates and inspires further action. The other thing is that while the game talks about these, my book, and I highlight the stories of these incredible personalities and players of that era. And for those listening, it's a fast read. It's under 250 pages. It's intended to be flowing, so that if you're a big fan, you're going to love it. But if you're a casual fan, you'll love it just as much.
Yeah. If you're a baseball guy, you're gonna less than a week, guys. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing I would say is that we shouldn't forget that 17,000 people came to this game. 17,000. Right. They raised $15,000 for this guy's family, which in 1917 dollars was about 3 times the cost of the average home in Boston. This is a lot of money. And so my point is, average people did that. Yes, it required this exhibition. It required participation, presence, but it was average people that moved the needle in aggregate. And for each person who played on the field, there were several more who woke up that day and said, I'm going to take the trolley, I'm going to walk the steps, I'm going to go through the turnstile, and maybe I'm going to bring my kid and I'm going to show them what it means to show up for somebody else. I'm going to buy a program to support this memorial fund. I bought the tickets. I'm going to explain to him or her, this is why we are here today. This is why it's an unusual day. This is why the Red Sox are playing All-Stars instead of the Cleveland Indians or the Baltimore Orioles or whomever it may be. And that is I think the key ingredient of society. It's in the average citizen of what is it that we're teaching our young people? How are we educating the next generation about what our roles and responsibilities are as individuals living in a great republic, which this is? And how do we orient ourselves where we simultaneously take care of our individual needs while also looking after the country that has given us so much? For me, my first book was about President Kennedy's legacy and the spirit of ask not what your country can do for you in a totally nonpartisan way. And for me, I believe that so much has been done for all of us, regardless of where we live, when we came to this country, what our families do, any of those things. There is a land of freedom here where things are possible. And people can rise up from nothing. And even if they don't rise up in prominence, they can rise up in their station and in the things that they do to contribute to society. That is what's so valuable and what's so special, because there's no other place in the world that is as free for people in one generation to do those types of things, to live by the values that they want. If you're a law-abiding citizen and you want to contribute, you can do that here. You're expected to do it. And it's a privilege, but it's also an obligation.
That's very, very well said and inspiring. I'm going to go pick up some trash next week, I think.
There you go.
I guess I want to talk about, this was a game that Walter Johnson comes in relief. Like this is a game they're trying to win. This is not the exhibitions to the All-Star game as today. But in many ways, as it's even in the title of the book, this is essentially the blueprint for the All-Star game. You have a skills competition even before it, like we do now. We have the best play. How much of a role did this game play in sort of creating the All-Star game as we know it today?
You said a couple of things there. The first is I totally agree with you. This was a game that guys were playing for real. They were playing really hard. I don't want to spoil the result, but it came right down to the wire and was tight the whole way. And it's pretty exciting. It's pretty cinematic how this game unfolds. As for your point about how did this game become the blueprint for the All-Star game, the All-Star game, of course, officially gets named as such in 1933. That's the inaugural All-Star game. But even in 1933, the idea was not to say, let's have a permanent All-Star game. It was, let's have a single game purely for entertainment purposes. The Chicago Tribune was wanting to put something on for purposes of making money and entertainment. And Chicago as a city was celebrating its centennial. And, it also was hosting the World's Fair that year. And so in the context of the Great Depression, where 25% of the American workforce is unemployed and people are scrounging for meals, they weren't going to baseball games. And so this was a marketing ploy to say, how do we get people to come to the stands to make this worthy of an expenditure? So they played this game. What's the connection between 17 and 33? It may not feel overt because the 33 game doesn't say, just like we did in 1917, this is what we're doing. They don't do that. But there are connected personalities there. So like Babe Ruth, for example, I mentioned is the pitcher for the Red Sox in this game. 1933, he's the star of the game, hitting a game-winning 2-run homer. So you have personalities that overlap. And in fact, Ruth later in life was still writing about the Murnane Day because of how meaningful it was to him and how much he enjoyed the home run derby and all this stuff. So this was definitely a salient memory that stuck with these players. The other piece of it is that the idea for an all-star game was not born with Murnane Day. It happens to be the greatest synthesis of ideas that had been percolating for some time. So, for example, it's not the first benefit game. There were other situations where people had died tragically and they said, let's bring people together. It wasn't on the same scale. It wasn't players from both leagues. They were shortened games, 6 innings. Guys were rotating positions every inning, not taking it seriously. So there's a lot of reasons why this is the right place to begin the journey. But in 1915, just 2 years before this game, there's a magazine called Baseball Magazine, a publication that has an editor named F.C. Lane. And Lane proposes in an article in 1915 that there ought to be a Midsummer Classic. And in fact, his proposal wasn't even a single game. He wanted it to be a best of 9 all-star series in the middle of the season. So obviously that didn't come to fruition. But my point in saying that is that the idea, the genesis behind bringing the best people together to do something for simultaneous entertainment purposes and athletic purposes and competition was not new. And so 1917, the Murnane Day becomes the synthesis of all these things. And then there are no other such games between 17 and 33. So when you think about like, well, where did this come out of? What did it build on? Built on the last time that this happened with a home run derby and all this other stuff. And so to me, it's a fairly, fluid, but nonetheless direct line from 17 to 33. And then after 33, they say, gee, this was really successful. Why don't we do this one more time? And in fact, by the way, there wasn't even unanimity in 33 among the owners saying that they wanted to do it. In fact, some objected, saying for the very reason, oh, if we do this, it's going to become an annual thing. People are going to want to do this. They didn't want to do this. And then it became such a popular event, and Ruth stole the show. And so people, of course, wanted to do something. I'll share for the baseball fans out there a pretty cool tidbit, too, that connects these games. 1917, there's a player on the Red Sox named Everett Scott. He's the original Iron Man who held the record for the most consecutive games played. Now, let's fast forward to 1933, which had a fan ballot, the first of its kind, where, again, the Chicago Tribune was doing this to sell newspapers. But they said, let's have the fans do this. So how did you vote? You had to buy the newspaper and you'd have to clip a ballot and send it in, right? And so I'm saying this because Lou Gehrig is on the Yankees, and he's on his way already to be breaking Everett Scott's Ironman record of most consecutive games played on his climb to 2,130 before, of course, Cal Ripken Jr. decades later would break Gehrig's record. So Gehrig gets voted in by the fans. And the game is to be held at Comiskey Park in Chicago. And the Yankees are not playing in Chicago the next day. He's got to get back to the Bronx. So the people say to him, what happens if the reporters went to Gehrig and they said, what happens if you get stuck, due to rain and the trains don't come on time, you miss your next game when you're just weeks away from breaking this incredible record that Everett Scott holds? And Gehrig gives an incredible response. He says, well, it's an honor to be chosen to play in this game. And if I don't break the record, I don't break the record. I want to do the right thing. And fortunately for him and for the record books, and it sounds like you're a Yankee fan, so for you too, Gehrig is able to play, and then he successfully gets back. He plays in the game, and the streak continues, which, of course, as I said, holds up for a very long time. What's the point of this story? The point is that there are all these connections when we look for it, and what I love about what Lou Gehrig stood for, and I think I just read recently on something on Netflix or whatever, there's some series or story that's coming out about him.
Yep.
Maybe it's some film. And, Gehrig stands for this moment in time where he gives the famous speech, his farewell at Yankee Stadium, where he declares himself despite the fact that he got a bad break, he thinks he's the luckiest man on the face of the earth, and gearing himself, immortally for people in New York and beyond. But here's Gehrig saying, I'm willing to put the game above and before a personal record that means nothing in the standings, right? I think that's incredible. It's totally selfless. There's no personal gain there. He's saying, I want to do the right thing. And I don't know if we would have that today. I mean, we've had players that sit out games to ensure that they win the batting title right at the end of the season, and other things that, is that what people bought their tickets for, to see, the best batter in the league for a particular year not playing a game? I mean, this is something that I feel is a little bit missing. And these are guys that lived in more difficult physical times, in that they didn't have the luxury we have today. They were riding overnight trains. They were carrying their own bags. They were staying in little, inns. They didn't have private jets and luxury hotels and limousines and all the things that we're accustomed to today. And I'm not, criticizing those things. I'm just saying these guys had a different level of toughness and commitment that is not replicable, it seems, today.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question for you. I'm going to Boston over Labor Day. And as we've talked about, old Yankee Stadium is now a pile of trash. But you can still go to Fenway Park. And I'm now excited to go to Fenway Park because this game took place there. And it's another little piece of history that's unlocked for me. And it just gives it more meaning.
Because of my book, more than the game?
Yes.
I'm teasing.
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah. Well, no, because I wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for your book.
I'm teasing.
Of course.
But yes, listen, I think Fenway Park is this special, incredibly special place. And I'm a Met fan. I didn't grow up, although I'll confess I'm not a Yankee fan, so I have a little bit of a romantic affinity for the Red Sox given the rivalry. But there's something special about Fenway. It's built into the city. It's got weird geometry. It's got really rich traditions and stories. And it's a place that has had, I still think on balance more heartbreak than celebration, right?
Sure.
I mean, even though there's been some
Sure.
World Series titles in this century, it was a long run since what was it, 1918? I think was the last time the Red Sox had won before they won in
4, yeah.
2004.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2004. So I think that this is the nice part about going to any other ballpark that's not your home ballpark. It's something that gives us a fresh perspective on the game and to just appreciate what we have back home and to see what works the same and what works differently in other ballparks. And you hear it in the cadence of the announcer who's announcing when players come up to bat. You hear the songs that get played, the music, the sounds, right? The smells of a place. You get a feel for the vibe of what kind of place is this? Does it hold its tradition the right way? Is it something that's going to look the same in 25 years? Is this something that, I'm going to be able to attend with a family member, whatever, all these different pieces. So I think Fenway is one of those really special romantic places. This ballpark opened in 1912. This is this is not just a landmark. This is like literally a jewel
Oh,
of a
yeah.
place. And what I think is also super special is that it's something that you can access like literally from the city. You don't have to go
Yeah.
out of the city to go
Yeah.
somewhere. And in New York, right, with the exception of Madison Square Garden, all these other places, you have to go somewhere. You go to the outer boroughs, you go to New Jersey for football games for the Jets and Giants, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to go when you were researching the book to Fenway?
I didn't this time around. I've been to Fenway, but I was more focused on the older research because Fenway's gone through multiple renovations
Right.
over
It's
time. The
yes.
Green
Yes.
Monster was not originally there. They did have a very high wall, so that was a hallmark. They also had this incredible thing where instead of a warning track, they had the incline, the slope from the outfield up to the base of the wall, so that there was literally a hill in play for years. They called it Duffy's Cliff after Duffy Lewis, the Boston outfielder who knew all the ricochets and angles better than anybody. But yeah, the next time I go there, certainly, and I might even go up there next month myself. But that place is special and worth going to. And I will say that it coincided with the book coming out that the Red Sox went on this crazy tear, and now all of a
Right.
sudden have a potentially nice season on their hands.
Yeah. They're in the playoffs as of recording. The Red Sox are in the playoffs after starting off terribly, and I think it's completely fair to credit all to you actually. So
I
congratulations on the
appreciate it.
book. It is phenomenal. I really, really enjoyed it. It's again, I think I said already. It's amazing when you can unlock a piece of baseball history and American history that you can reflect on and see the world today, or not see the world today in some ways, and figure out what we can do about that. And that's really what this book was about to me. So really, thank you. Enjoy the time so much.
I appreciate it. Well, for the fans listening, one day it's September, Baseball Brotherhood and the birth of the All Star game. Would love for you to pick it up and would love to hear what you think.